Ladies and gentlemen, now is an excellent time to be a PC gamer. There are some absolutely amazing pieces of hardware that are scheduled to launch over the next several months from AMD, Intel, and of course Nvidia. But exactly what will the release dates be? Well, of course, as you probably guessed from the title of this video, that's what we're going to be focusing on here. Now, let's begin with Zen 5. AMD have officially disclosed many of the Granite Ridge details, and it does seem, according to my sources anyway, that we're going to see the vanilla CPUs launch late July. The 31st of July has been a date that a couple of sources have told me, with the review embargo perhaps a couple of weeks earlier. But what about the X3D parts? Because honestly, July has been a date that many on Twitter was also talking about, although just late July from some folks, or kind of mid to late July. And it didn't really take, a huge amount of guesswork to figure that out because, AMD have already, of course, announced the processors. But the vanilla parts typically are separated by several months from the X3D cousins. And the X3D parts allegedly are actually going to launch much earlier than the rumors, which was going to be Q1 2025. Instead, some sources are telling Club 386 that we will actually see these CPUs launching in September. So according to a quote highly reliable source, it seems that the 9950X3D is very likely to launch in September, and potentially also the Ryzen 9000X3D as well. There was a level of confidence behind our sources' words. They're trustworthy enough to put stock into. That said, familiarity with how nebulous AMD's launch schedules are urges this to take things with a pinch of salt. Nothing confirmed until you have seen a sample in your hands, as dates can easily change. End quote. I also want to give courtesy credit to videocards.com, where I initially spotted the story being reported. But if this is true, September is a very intriguing date for a couple of reasons. One, it would mean that we see these processors launch much sooner than what we have seen, the gaps between other vanilla and X3D parts in the past. But secondly, it would be the same month that we're going to see Intel's Arrow Lake processors launch for desktop. Now, this is my personal opinion. I'm just going to spend a second talking about this. I would personally advise you guys to wait until September or early October to buy anyway. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One, if the X3D parts do launch, even if you do want to stick to AMD, then, well, you've got the choice and can kind of figure out the pricing differences between the X3D and, of course, the vanilla parts. The second is that you will also understand where Intel are coming from, and all of this combined with the fact that at that point, boards will be out, reviewers will have, reviewed things, and you'll have a better understanding where performance is, a better understanding of what boards overclock the best in terms of memory and all of the other bits and pieces. Basically speaking, you're just going to able to make a better purchasing decision, and I think that's a very good thing. AMD have also teased that the X3D parts are going to have a little bit of special sauce this time around. They didn't really disclose what that special sauce is. I've heard from a few people that the clock frequency of the X3D parts is going to be higher this time around, but whether one, that is true, and two, whether that is the only difference between this generation and say the previous generation and with the higher speeds, or whether there's something else that they've done, I honestly don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see the pricing strategy and also how the performance differs between the X3D and vanilla parts versus Arrow Lake. I will also be very, very interested to see if September is true for the X3D parts, and I have reached out to some sources, but at this point no one's gotten back to me, so, I'm reporting this as is. If it is true, I'll be very curious to see what the sales split is. Obviously, a lot of it is going to be pricing. And obviously, it's no way you're going to be this, but if it's like $50 difference between the X3D and the vanilla parts, no one is going to buy the vanilla parts, right? So I think there's going to be a pretty big price difference between them. I'll be very interested to see how the performance does differ though. And now we're going to move on to both RDNA 4 and Nvidia's Blackwell graphics cards. Now, RDNA 4 as well as Blackwell were initially, it seems, going to launch later this year, according to a lot of rumors from myself and just general consensus online. But things seem to have changed a little bit. So prior to Computex, I mentioned in a few videos that I was hearing that 1, RDNA 4 is not going to be at Computex, and 2, there's a very good chance it is not going to launch this year at all. Instead, it's going to be next year, somewhere around Q1, possibly Q2, but an exact release date I wasn't either able to get or hadn't been decided. So it's not like I was able to say, well, it's the 12th of February or something like that. I just heard Q1/Q2. But now others are reporting much the same thing. There's some articles on both WCCF Tech, videocards.com, and general chat online that, yeah, RDNA 4 does seem to have been delayed. Now, it's quite interesting because also there are some new Linux patches yet again for RDNA 4. So, this is kind of conflicting because, like, is AMD just debating us, and will these cards launch? Honestly, I'll be very interested to see what they do with these GPUs. I mean, obviously they're not going to be as performant as RTX 50, for example, but they should still be very competitive indeed, and the pricing, of course, is what's going to make or break any release anyway. Let's just hypothetically say that it's roughly in the same ballpark, rasterization-wise, to the 7900 XTX. And by ballpark, I mean, let's say 10% slower to faster, who cares, right? It's pretty much the same thing. But if it's pretty damn cheap and has better ray tracing performance, it's still going to be a winner. Like, it's not like a 7900 XTX is slow, and again, if the pricing is good enough, it's going to appeal to a lot of people. Like, you know, 1440p, of course, these cards are just going to rip through it. It's not like it's going to be bad at 4K. So, yeah, RTX 50, you know, a 5090 or what have you, will be faster. But again, pricing here is what's really going to make a difference. The rumor is that the actual chips themselves are really small. The dies, I mean. But the materials costs are just kind of all over the place at the moment, so it's going to be very interesting to see what the pricing strategy is. That's allegedly a reason that AMD are not launching these GPUs yet, because they basically want to nuke some of the N32 and 31 inventory, so we'll have to wait. But also RTX 50. Now, RTX 50 is another GPU that, of course, was scheduled allegedly to launch later this year. And Blackwell, well, we know some stuff about it for the data center, but clearly there's going to be some small differences between the gaming variant and what you would see in a high-end data center. With that said, though, there were many reports that we're going to see GB202 at the very least launch, it seems. So we're going to see the 5090 and the 5080, with perhaps the 5080 launching a little bit earlier. Depending on who you ask, it was a couple of weeks to a month or what have you, but basically speaking, it was still going to launch later this year. According to several sources I've spoken to, that was the plan. More recently, one of my sources told me it may be a little later than that, maybe Q1, but most people, again, still talking about, well, this year. But then there were some rumors on Twitter that perhaps actually, no, it is next year. And then we started to see some reports from Hassan at WCCF Tech, and basically, when he was at Computex, some AIBs had told him basically this year, and another 4 had told him next year. And now others are basically saying the same thing, that this delay could actually be real, and RTX 50 may actually launch later this year. So we basically have potentially some type of delay for both AMD and Nvidia's next generation cards. As for Intel, well, that's interesting. As many of you know, I did leak the roadmap for that, but clearly something has changed, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Intel's Battlemage. It seems that, you know, from the architecture details that they did disclose at their event, Battlemage actually looks pretty cool. It seems that they are focusing a lot at the moment on optimizing the drivers, because they do not want a repeat of what we saw with Alchemist, which is fair. I guess a delay would kind of depend on your perspective. Like, if you're someone who's chugging along on like a 980 Ti and you've just upgraded or just about to upgrade your CPU and motherboard platform, then perhaps the delay is going to suck a little bit. On the other hand, if you've got like a 3080 or something like that, you're probably not that fussed about waiting. Let me know in the comments what you feel about this. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. There was also a recent laptop roadmap that got leaked. I'm not going to go through this too extensively because the roadmap is a little bit old now, but in terms of the leak, but you can see that essentially speaking, Blackwell for laptops does seem like it's going to launch next year. However, when it comes to the laptop side of things, it doesn't really make much of a difference because ultimately there's generally like a date separation between laptops and desktop anyway. So you can't say, well, this is launching this month in this year for laptop, therefore that's going to have direct impact on desktop. Desktop typically launches a little bit sooner, but it's going to be a curious one. I'm going to be very interested to see what the prices are for this for next generation. I have heard that they are more expensive, but again, stuff can change up until the very last minute. But I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Leave a like and all of that stuff. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.